CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The European Union proposes a ban on Russian oil by the end of the year, but not all member countries agree.
Heavy fighting resumes at the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol, but some Ukrainian civilians, including children, are still trapped there.
Berlin considers a new law to force sanctioned Russians to disclose what assets they hold in Germany.
Elon Musk suggests some businesses and governments may have to pay to use Twitter as he's asked to appear before British lawmakers.
And high pressure in the forecast. China sets up the highest weather station on Earth.
The European Union will ban imports of Russian oil by the end of this year if member countries agree.
The latest round of sanctions on Moscow is seen as a key moment in the EU's response to the invasion of Ukraine, with Europe still heavily reliant on Russian energy. Russia's top bank is also expected to be taken out of the SWIFT global payment system, while 3 more state-owned Russian broadcasters are set to be removed from European airwaves.
Well, our correspondent Rebecca Bunden is in Brussels for us. Rebecca, just talk us through the EU's proposed sanctions.
This 6th round of sanctions sees some of the toughest measures yet being proposed by the European Commission, including, of course, that oil embargo, which would see crude oil imports from Russia being phased out within 6 months, and then refined fuel products by the end of the year. That's going to be a big step if that all gets signed off by the EU member countries. We know that there has been some resistance from countries, particularly Hungary, that have said that they would oppose energy sanctions because of their dependence on oil. And then we've seen these other steps as well being announced, plans to cut off Sberbank, which is Russia's largest lender, from the SWIFT payment network. That would have a huge impact on Russia's financial system. These measures being taken to really cut off revenue streams that are going into Russia that are being used at the moment to finance the war with Ukraine. And then we've also seen plans announced for high-ranking military officers to be targeted as well, and 3 state-run broadcasters too. So really heavy-hitting sanctions being proposed. They do have to be approved, of course, but the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen explaining how important these were earlier today. Let's have a listen.
Today we are addressing our dependency on Russian oil, and let's be clear, it will not be easy, because some member states are strongly dependent on Russian oil, but we simply have to do it. So today we will propose to ban all Russian oil from Europe. This will be a complete import ban on all Russian oil, seaborne and pipeline.
So this will have a huge impact on the European Union as well, with prices potentially rising, inflation. There will be economic pain for the region and globally too, potentially, with such a ban. But really, the EU sees this as important at this point in time as a way to actually cut off those finances to the Kremlin.
Rebecca, I've been asking you about oil, but of course, yet again, no reference in the speech to Russian gas in this latest round of economic sanctions.
Yes, in these sanctions that have been proposed, there wasn't a reference to gas, but earlier the European Commission has already said that it plans to reduce the EU's dependency on Russian gas by 2/3 by the end of this this year. It's a more complicated process, it seems, with gas, given the storage, the infrastructure that's needed, actually finding alternatives, which is another challenge as well for countries now with this oil situation as well. If this embargo goes through, they will have to look for alternatives too. But the gas issue has also come into sharper focus after last week Bulgaria and Poland were actually cut off from Russian supplies because of the demand for payment in rubles. That's made the EU very, very aware of the precariousness of this situation of depending on Russian gas. And actually, earlier this week, EU energy ministers met here in Brussels to discuss that matter, and they are talking more and discussing how to actually ramp up reducing that dependency on Russian gas and turning to alternatives and actually building up infrastructure as well, and looking at other solutions such as renewables. That is something that countries in the EU are looking at increasingly.
That's the EU picture. The UK has also announced a fresh round of sanctions. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, so the UK has announced that Russian companies, Russia will be cut off from using UK-based, UK management consultants, accountants, and public relations firms. This really sees the UK as well also ramping up the international pressure at the same time as we're seeing these proposals coming through from the European Commission as well. The UK has also announced that it will impose sanctions on 63 individuals and organisations. Now, many of these individuals or organisations are related or are within the Russian media world. So here, the UK is really trying to look at targeting any disinformation. What it says is the spread of lies. So that's the thought process behind that. But really, we are seeing, we are seeing countries, Western nations now really ramping up their response, really trying to hit Russia very hard.
Rebecca, thanks for that. Rebecca Bunden, our correspondent in Brussels.
Well, let's talk now to Carol Knuckler, who's the CEO of Crystal Energy, an independent energy consultancy. Welcome to the programme, Carol. Thanks for joining us. So these proposed sanctions on Russian oil by the EU, how much of a blow would they be for Russia?
Well, if they are implemented, depending also on when they will become effective, because we still have time if they get approved. So we have another 6 months. And also depends on where the oil price is going to be when those sanctions are going to be effective. But assuming everything is going to be as it is today, definitely Russia is going to feel the economic pain from losing an important access to a key market that is European Union. It's not going to cripple the Russian economy overnight. It will have consequences, probably lasting scarring in the longer term, especially if you pile on top of that additional sanctions, because you have to recognize it's not the whole world which is uniting against Russia. It's European Union and some countries outside the Union, but there are also half of the world, almost half of the world's largest consumers are still buying Russian oil. So in this respect, it's not going to bring Russia on its knees, but it's going definitely to cause some economic pain.
So as you say, the EU, a key market, but other potential customers out there, where do you think they will sell that oil?
Well, look, you have to look at where Russia has been selling its oil. So the EU is its main market, with Germany being its largest customer for all its energy exports. But if we look outside the EU, you can see that Asia plays an important role, with China being an important importer of Russian energy. And Russia looks at China in particular as a key market for its oil exports, but more importantly, in the future, its gas exports. And that's why they've announced building another pipeline, in addition to the Power of Siberia pipeline. But also you have other consumers, such as, for example, India. And as we know, China and India are the largest oil importers in the world. And when you have Russian oil selling at a discount compared to other benchmarks, such as Brent, then it becomes more attractive to such consumers to buy.
I want to come back to gas in just a moment, but first of all, Moscow has said that an oil embargo would be a double-edged sword for the EU. Can the EU afford to take this step of sanctions?
Well, look, they must have thought about it. And as the commissioner said, the EU commissioner said, not going to be easy. So they recognize the economic pain. And this is why they did not say that we're going to implement the ban effective as of today. They are doing it gradually, and they've been preparing for it. And even Germany, where we saw some studies published about how the German economy might end up in a recession because of such ban. Only a month ago, they talked about banning oil, Russian oil, would be a red line, and they were completely against it. But today they changed their position, and they are supporting such ban because they know it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen over the next 6 months and towards the end of the year. And by then, we have to remember that even before the war in Ukraine, we were expecting additional supplies to come to the market from the second half of this year. So probably oil markets are not going to be as tight as we are seeing today, and that could ease a little bit the pain.
Carol Nutley, we are out of time, but thanks very much indeed for talking to us today. Carol Nutley there from Crystal Energy.
In Ukraine, heavy fighting is reported to have resumed at the steelworks in Mariupol. The city's mayor says he's lost contact with the soldiers inside the plant, and more than 30 children are still trapped inside. Hundreds of civilians are waiting to be evacuated from the complex. Let's talk to John Gambrell of the Associated Press in Lviv. John, can you update us on what we think is happening in Mariupol?
It appears that there is intense fighting around this steel mill that's been the focus of so much international attention over the last couple of weeks. Those Ukrainian officials who are in the city, including the mayor, say that that facility is being struck not just from aircraft in the air, not just by missiles, not just by mortars, but also by ships at sea as well, smashing into this facility and apparently digging in meters deep into concrete, giving you an idea of how much of a bombardment this is. This all started just in the last 24 to 36 hours ago. We saw this convoy of people leave there as part of an evacuation, and almost immediately afterwards, Russian forces began firing on the facility. Ukraine has accused Russia of trying to storm the facility and try to take it from those last remaining fighters who are inside. Russia has said that's not the case. Russia is describing it, putting it like a tight cordon around the facility so no one can get in, no one can get out. But just from the level of destruction that we've seen in satellite photos taken early this morning, most of the facility there has gaping holes, debris scattered everywhere, and it looks like the fighting isn't going to stop anytime soon.
Talk about where you are. Russia has hit power stations in Lviv. What's the situation there?
Just as people were sitting down to dinner last night, there were a series of explosions that just rocked the city. Black smoke rose up in the sky, and people who were on the street who've gotten kind of used to the sense of calm that's here, we're pretty far from the front line in the east, were shocked and ran to bomb shelters last night. Basically, what we think happened was Russia targeted 3 different electrical substations with cruise missiles. These are missiles that fly really low to the ground to avoid detection by radar. They slammed into these facilities, destroying them, causing fires from what we saw. Russia says they targeted these facilities because this electrical system was part of controlling the local trains that run through here. Lviv has become a hub for transit, both for people fleeing the fighting as well as weapons coming in from Poland and from America and other European nations that are providing arms to the Ukrainians. This electrical fire caused trouble for the power pumps for the water supply here. It also disrupted electricity to several neighborhoods, and it reminded so many people in this city that nowhere is safe.
What's the latest on the offensive in the eastern Donbass region?
British military officials estimate that Russia now has some 22 battalion tactical groups. This is a Russian military term for a group of forces that includes tanks, artillery, anti-aircraft missiles, and other weaponry. These BTG, as they're known, it would probably count in about 17,000 troops. They're describing these troops as wanting to move around the Ukrainian bulge that's there and try to cut them off and then squeeze them out from inside. But the Ukrainians have been digging in recent days. They've been resupplied with long-range weapons, including drones, as well as howitzer artillery from the Americans. This is These are cannons that shoot targets that are at a very far distance, allowing the Ukrainians to pick off Russian targets. And they've also been able to push Russian forces further away from Kharkiv. That's also on the front line in the east. That's Ukraine's second largest city that's just been hit by days and days of shelling. By pushing the Russians further back, that's allowing the Ukrainians to breathe a little bit easier in Kharkiv. And it's having some analysts say that Ukraine may be ready to take an offensive to the Russians themselves in the coming days.
John, thanks for that. John Gambrell of the Associated Press in Lviv.
Ukraine's president has accused Russia of breaking a ceasefire agreement, which would allow more civilians to leave the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol.
This comes after a convoy of evacuees arrived in Ukraine-controlled territory, bringing with them stories of their ordeal. CGTN's correspondent Guy Henderson reports.
They are deeply traumatized, but at least they're alive. After 2 months trapped under Mariupol's Azovstal steel plant, 100 or so civilians finally made it to the relative safety of Ukrainian-controlled territory. Some escapees have been out on the streets to call for those left behind to be rescued. They tell the most harrowing of tales. We were told our bomb shelter wouldn't withstand a direct hit and that we'd be buried alive, says 54-year-old Elena Sipulchenko. 28-year-old Natasha tells of newborn babies turning blue for lack of food and eventually dying of starvation. Shortly after evacuations that took place on Monday, Russian rockets were seen being fired towards the Azovstal plant again. Tuesday, the Romanian-Ukrainian soldiers inside posted this video claiming a new assault was underway, but on Wednesday, Moscow denied that was the case. Despite the growing risks, some residents of Mariupol have actually turned down evacuation offers. 64-year-old Tatiana Bushlanova's house has been destroyed. I would have left, Tatiana says, but where would I go? Some of the escapees have made it even further afield now, to the capital, Kiev, from where they join Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky in calling for the humanitarian window to remain open. This is not a victory yet, President Zelensky says, referring to the evacuations so far, but it is a result. Taking Azovstal would effectively give the Russian army its land bridge to Crimea, a victory of sorts it could try and sell back home. There may well still be civilians inside, though, and their fate now hangs in the balance. Guy Henderson, CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, what have Tesla and MasterCard got that Renault and Credit Suisse haven't?
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal.
as we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Just a reminder for you that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
The Federal Reserve is expected to announce its first half-point increase rate rise in over 20 years in an attempt to battle inflation. It'll also be the first time since 2006 that the central bank has delivered consecutive rate increases. Our correspondent John Terrett has been there for all of them. Let's talk to him now. John, the Fed is about to get serious then.
Yes. Funny enough, I have been here for all of them. You're absolutely right about that, or certainly the last one you mentioned there. Yeah, I mean, it's been 22 years since we had an interest rate hike of this magnitude. The year 2000 you have to go back to, and it comes as a survey out today by the Fox organization shows that 87% of people polled are very, very concerned about inflation in this country at the moment, and they really are, particularly the mom and pops who have to go shopping on a Saturday and see their food baskets going up and up in price. And of course at the gas station it's a very similar story, as I know it is in the UK and indeed all over Europe. So 90 minutes to go, 2 p.m. local time, just over 90 minutes, 2 p.m. local time, 20G. We should get the... No, it's not. It's 18G. We should get the announcement. And we are expecting it to be a 50 basis point hike. What's a basis point? Well, it's it's what they use for bonds and for interest rates. They break it down into 10. So we're going from 25 basis points to 75 basis points. So it's not like a full percentage increase. But I have to warn you, it could be 75 basis points, which would take us to a full 1%. But I should also say that's still very, very low. Now, the idea is that all of this will calm inflation, which is at a 40-year high and is beginning to hurt here now, as it is in Europe, because basically it affects confidence and it simply saps the purchasing power of individuals and also corporations. So in a few hours, car loans here will more. Some mortgages will cost more, not all, because many of them are 30-year fixed-rate mortgages here, and some bank loans will cost more. But hey, let's look on the bright side. If you're a saver, then you're going to get a bit of money for your money you have in the bank for the first time in years and years and years. And an example of that would be what the Americans call a CD, which is a certificate of deposit. It's a very, very low-risk way of saving. So people who have CDs will get some return, some monthly return on their money for the first time in a very long time. Dow is down today very sharply after 2 days' worth of gains, and Bitcoin is benefiting. It's up about $1,000 at the moment. Guys?
John, we were talking about the EU imposing sanctions on Russian oil earlier in the programme.
Yes.
And oil is now up 3% following the EU's sanction proposals.
Yes.
I wonder what investors there make of this.
Well, all I can do is report to you what they're talking about here, okay? So the benchmark for oil in the world is Brent, which comes out of the North Sea. Here in America, the benchmark is WTI, West Texas Intermediate, otherwise known as Texas T, and it's up 3.5% at the moment to $106 a barrel. So you ask yourself, what was the point of releasing all those reserves last month? Because it doesn't seem to have done any good. People here think that this is the biggest blow that the West can impose on Moscow. You've seen all the sanctions that have been imposed so far and the attacks on the oligarchs and their money and their houses and their boats one way or another. Well, this is pretty serious for Russia. So the question here is, where will the Russian oil go? Who might buy it? Well, the answer to that appears to be China or Russia, but Russia has or India. But Russia has a problem because there's only one pipeline that goes across the continent and it's already at full capacity. So they'd have to put it into tankers. And that's not really very realistic because there aren't enough tankers. And anyway, the tankers are insured and owned by big Western businesses who would immediately stop the tankers from sailing. They could keep it in the ground, but they can't slow down their output like they can in Saudi Arabia. They'd have to close off the wells altogether. And the theory here is that because people like Hungary are very angry about this, what actually will end up happening by the end of the year is that the EU will simply slap a huge tax on Russian oil and gas imports into the European Union, making the Russians take an even greater hit than they're already taking. That's the word on the street here for now.
Let's talk about Twitter. Elon Musk wants to charge.
Yes,
what do we make of that?
Well, Elon Musk, of course, doesn't own the company yet, and he's not going to own it till the end of the year, so we have plenty of time for all this to play out. But as you know, he's our favourite person on the programme. We like to talk about him almost every day if we can. He's got a choice. He either does it through advertising to make money, or they come up with some kind of subscription. And this is the notion that we're now hearing from Mr. Musk. He's talking about charging big businesses and governments to get onto Twitter. He says that ordinary folk like you and me will still be able to get onto Twitter completely free. Twitter already has what it calls Twitter Blue, which is a premium service that you can pay for. So I guess it could be some kind of extension for that. United Kingdom MPs, I think, want to haul him before them to say, oi, mate, what's going on here? Because we don't like the idea of governments and big businesses paying for this global forum. I doubt whether much he'll appear, either virtually or certainly not in person. And anyway, he doesn't own the company yet, so it'll be a long while if he ever does. He's learning something. This is the penalty you pay for owning a big media company. You know, you can invent an electric vehicle maker, you can invent a space company, and everyone goes, oh, my God, how wonderful, what a lot of money he's made, how incredible, he's changed the world. You own a media company, and suddenly everybody wants a piece of you, and he's realizing that now.
John, good to see you. Thanks for that. Our correspondent, John Terrett, in New York.
BP has said it plans to invest up to $22.5 billion in UK energy by the end of 2030, continuing to grow its North Sea oil and gas business. It comes after the energy company posted its highest quarterly profit in 14 years. Critics say this is an attempt by BP to avoid a windfall tax amid soaring energy costs for customers.
Famous for making James Bond's car, British luxury car maker Aston Martin has used its ejector seat and bid farewell to the boss, Tobias Moers, who will step down with immediate effect. Amadio Polisa, the former boss of Ferrari, has been named as its new CEO.
A $3 billion deal to buy Chelsea Football Club could collapse after a possible U-turn by its sanctioned Russian owner, Roman Abramovich. The UK government is concerned that the sale could be structured in a way to allow Abramovich to be given back almost $2 billion he loaned to the club. That's despite the Russian oligarch initially saying he would write this off.
Is your business ready to survive the next big crisis? A new report says what got firms through the pandemic are not the same attributes they need to thrive today.
IMD Business School says that the economic threats of political wars, inflation and investor confidence have changed prospects for success of the world's largest companies.
Our business correspondent Juliet Mann has the story. Juliet.
Thanks, Jamie and Robin. Well, firms of all shapes and sizes need to stay nimble in a world of change. And this study from IMD looks at how companies adapt to the new external shocks to their supply chains and operations. Their resilience is measured by their future readiness. Now, zoning in on electrification, it's Tesla, Toyota and Volkswagen. They're the most future-ready companies in the automotive industry. Several companies fared much worse than expected, including Renault, which isn't spending as much as its peers on research and development, Suzuki and EV producer Rivian. Now, the research links commitment to electrification to the future resilience of the auto industry and noted how Toyota avoided the worst of the chip shortage by stockpiling. In other words, today's backlogs and breakdowns in the supply chain are the new normal, making getting ahead of disruptions as early as possible crucial. Now, the report also looked at financial services and the financial services rankings. Fortunes flipped this year from fintech to big banks who prioritised innovation and digitisation. So we've got credit card companies, MasterCard and Visa at the top there, JP Morgan, Chase as well at the top. And at the bottom, American Express and Credit Suisse, the latter, of course, dogged by reputation scandals throughout the year. China's insurance company Ping An and Zurich Insurance also fared pretty poorly. Well, Professor Howard Yu from the International Institute for Management Development is the author of the report. Thanks ever so much for joining us. Now, first of all, when you're putting this ranking together, what are you looking for?
Well, if you're thinking about future readiness, it's almost an organizational climate. To be future ready, your core business need to be still healthy. Otherwise, there's no resources to invest in the future. So we look at financial fundamental. We're looking at the board diversity. How diverse is the board, the management team? Because that allows an organization to think outside the box. We're looking at new product rollout, as many things you just described. But we're also looking at debt to cash ratio. We're looking at the ESG result. And last but not the least, of course, is business diversity, whether there's geographical diversity or business diversity, because that translates to a sense of resilience. So think about this as a balanced scorecard.
You talk about thinking outside the box, in which case, why has fintech slipped?
Well, it is a macroeconomic environment. So back in 2021, when we're looking at our ranking, companies like PayPal or Block, formerly Square, are doing extraordinarily well together with many fintech disruptors, those unicorn. But the easy money is drying up. Inflation is on the rise. Investors are looking at earnings demonstrated by companies. In this environment, if you are simply a one-trick pony, the so-called unicorn is no longer as alluring. This is why we see the shuffle between fintech versus big banks.
And big banks who are looking at digital innovation. But I want to talk autos with you. Tesla, big surprise at the top. But China's BYD, now that's been an interesting story, hasn't it?
Is a very, very interesting companies, because if you're looking at the whole global auto industry, as you mentioned earlier, Toyota has managed to escape in 2021 because they stockpile, but eventually whatever you store up would deplete. But BYD is one of these rare companies that are actually self-sufficient. It makes their own chipset. It also supplies to other car makers within China as well. Look, if you're thinking about auto industry, the future capability is not about electric drivetrain alone. Everyone can make an EV. But it's software, demonstrated by Tesla, or design of chipset, or manufacturing chipset yourself. These are capability relevant for the future, and BYD, as a relatively unconventional player, really harness and harbor these new capabilities.
Professor Howard, you always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Great to be here.
Juliet, thank you.
Thank you, Juliet. You're watching CGTN. Still to come. This isn't working. We need to change. A call from Italy on how it sees the way ahead for the European Union.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly. Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The European Union proposes a ban on Russian oil by the end of this year, but not all member countries agree. And heavy fighting resumes at the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol, but some Ukrainian civilians, including children, are still trapped there.
Moscow has called the EU's plans for a complete Russian oil ban a double-edged sword.
The Kremlin also dismissed speculation that Vladimir Putin will use the country's Victory Day on the 9th of May to declare what has been so far called a special military operation in Ukraine is now a war.
Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Will Denslow, who is in the Latvian capital, Riga. Will, first of all, tell us more about Russia's reaction to these EU's latest proposals.
Absolutely, Robin. We've heard from Dmitry Peskov, who is the Kremlin spokesperson. He says that Russia is considering a number of possible options to respond going forward. This comes as Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a decree that will essentially be another raft of sanctions. We don't know the details as to who or what will exactly be included. This is believed to be a list that's been compiled over the next 10 days or so. We do know, however, that these steps will seek to block the export of goods and raw materials to those entities that are included in this sanctions list. And as you rightly mentioned, Dmitry Peskov saying that these sanctions are, in his words, a double-edged sword. He says that this will lead to prices going up for many across Europe. This has been a point really stressed by Russia time and time again, as these tit-for-tat sanctions between Russia and Ukraine's allies have been going on for a number of weeks now. Russia essentially saying that this is a bit of an own goal.
And there has been growing concern that May the 9th could be the day when Russia declares a national mobilization and war on Ukraine. But the Kremlin says that's nonsense.
That's absolutely right, Robin. Of course, May the 9th is a significant day in the Russian calendar, a day when, in 1945, the Soviets declared victory over the Nazis. Now, this has fueled speculation that Russia could announce something huge on May the 9th, some believing it could be officially declaring a war in Ukraine, or at least some military victories. Now, as you rightly say, Dmitry Peskov saying that is nonsense. He says there is no chance of that happening. That's a point very much reiterated in recent days by Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister. He has said that Russia's objectives won't be dictated by arbitrary dates. He says that what Russia is concerned about is saving civilian lives on the ground, as well as providing security for Russia going forward. Robin?
Will, thanks very much. That's our correspondent Will Denslow in Riga.
Hungary says it cannot support the proposed EU embargo on Russian oil in its current form. Budapest says a complete ban would destroy its energy security. The Czech Republic, Slovakia and Bulgaria are also seeking exemptions. Let's talk to our correspondent Laura Making-Isherwood in Budapest. Laura, will Hungary simply reject the EU proposal, or is there still some kind of wriggle room here?
Well, officials are certainly attempting to hold up this ban being put in place, saying, as you mentioned, that they want oil that comes through pipelines to be exempt from this ban altogether. Now, of course, we know that the EU wants a complete ban on Russian oil imports into the European Union, but Hungary, Slovakia, a number of other countries are heavily reliant on those oil sources for their economies to continue to run effectively, for their people to continue their lives as normal. We know that the infrastructure here is built around those pipelines, and so if they were completely removed, then Hungary would have to find other sources of oil from other areas and indeed reshift its entire infrastructure here, its transport networks, to try to receive those oil supplies from elsewhere. That, of course, is going to cost a lot of money. And who is going to pay for that? Will it be the government? Will it be the EU? Or will it eventually be customers who will be forced to take that hit after profits are lost from oil companies here? So ministers and EU officials and representatives from Hungary that are part of these discussions are saying that they want other opportunities to be given to them. There had been, of course, reports that there might be a longer transition period offered to Hungary, perhaps 6 months to a year, to wean themselves off those Russian supplies. But there have been sources saying that the likes of Hungary and maybe even Slovakia would need around 2 years to do that. So this 6-month opportunity, looking at a ban maybe by the end of the year, might simply not be long enough for these countries to make these shifts.
Laura, can you give us a steer on how reliant these 4 Eastern European countries are on Russian energy? Is there any way to reduce their dependence?
They are heavily reliant. A lot of these countries, of course, are landlocked. They don't have access to those ports that other European nations do. So when a lot of the EU focus at the moment is a shift away from oil towards liquefied natural gas, that requires often those supplies to be brought into country via ports. There are conversations taking place between the likes of Bulgaria and Greece for a new terminal to be built to allow that to be brought into the country more effectively. But ultimately, as I said, it is a huge shift in the infrastructure network and the way in which these countries have operated for decades. Hungary has 65% of its oil coming from Russia. Other countries, including Slovakia, are even more heavily reliant on those imports. And so that is why they are saying they do not want this complete ban straight away. They will be having to look for alternatives, of course, if those Russian supplies are eventually moved away from, but that takes time and it takes investment. And so it is up to companies, it is up to the governments to decide they want to invest in that and move towards alternatives so that the country can continue without that Russian reliance.
Laura, thanks for that. Laura Macon-Isherwood, our correspondent in Budapest.
Italy has called on Europe to streamline its decision-making process as frustrations grow over the EU's divisions. Prime Minister Mario Draghi says the EU must reform its principle requiring all 27 member states to agree on foreign policy. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Alex Fraser, who's in Milan. Alex, tell us more about what Draghi's calling for.
So essentially, Mario Draghi is calling for a change to the way that the European Council endorses major foreign policy decisions. So the current system now is all 27 members must come to a unanimous agreement for a major policy decision to go through. Now, what he's proposing is something called a qualified majority. So right now, all those countries have a veto on the decision. And as we can see today, with what's going on with the ban on Russian gas, that many countries will object. So in a qualified majority, you only need a 55% majority for a decision to go through. So that would be 15 out of 27 members. Now, Draghi argues it will make decisions like today's one a lot easier. And also, he argues that it will make it much easier for new countries to join the bloc without other vetoes. That's countries from the Western Balkans, Ukraine, and Moldova.
So, Alex, how difficult will it be to carry out these reforms proposed by Draghi?
Well, of course, there'll be many countries that are against it because a lot of the smaller countries in the European Union would lose a lot of influence if they lose their veto. Some of the Eurosceptic nations will have to endorse positions that they don't necessarily agree with if they were to lose in a qualified majority. We also had Brexit, where the Leave campaign in Britain, this was one of the things they campaigned on, was about that Brexit, that without Brexit, that UK might lose its veto in the European Union. It's also very complicated to change any treaty. Nationalist governments like Hungary's would be very unhappy with further federalism. The last treaty change we had was the Lisbon Treaty. Well, now that gave an option to shift to using a qualified majority, but here's the catch. That could only happen with a unanimous decision from the European Council and could still be stopped by a single nation's veto. So, as you can see, it's very complicated, and no matter how much Draghi wants this, it will become very difficult to actually see this happen.
Alex Fraser in Milan, thank you.
Berlin says it's considering a new law which would force sanctioned Russians to disclose what assets they hold in Germany.
The announcement came after a two-day cabinet meeting where Ukraine dominated much of the agenda. Our correspondent Trent Murray reports.
Well, wrapping up this two-day cabinet retreat, Chancellor Olaf Scholz said his government would continue to support Ukraine diplomatically, militarily and economically. The leader of Europe's largest economy also said that he believed President Vladimir Putin had underestimated the unity and resolve of the West in response to this crisis.
Klar ist auch, dass aus dieser Veränderung folgt.
This brutal war of aggression against Ukraine has been completely miscalculated by Putin. What he has got is a united European Union and many countries in the world acting together, democracies that have organized a comprehensive package of sanctions to make Russia understand that it should end this war.
That declaration came as the Finance Minister Christian Lindner said his ministry would be exploring a possible asset disclosure mechanism which would force sanctioned oligarchs to disclose what assets they own in Germany. He said if they refuse to do so, there could be fines or even legal proceedings in the criminal courts. But it was the Economy Minister Robert Habeck which grabbed most of the attention. He said that while Germany does support the new EU ban on Russian oil imports, he said the country also needs to be realistic about the impact the ban could have.
Die Übergangsfrist ist
The transition period is long enough for us to take all the necessary precautions to create alternatives for Russian oil in Germany. Taking precautions does not mean that they will be realised immediately. I have said a few times that we can, of course, not guarantee in this situation that there won't be disruptions, primarily regional disruptions.
All of these political discussions come as Germany prepares to take centre stage internationally with 2 high-stakes summits next week, including a G7 foreign ministers meeting, followed straight after by a special NATO meeting here in the German capital, where Ukraine is expected to dominate the agenda, including the possibility of more military support for Kyiv. Trent Murray, CGTN, Berlin.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead as the UK prepares for local elections, why Northern Ireland could change the political landscape with a new nationalist leader.
A politician whose core belief is separation from Westminster and unity with Ireland. A leader whose ideology ultimately requires that this institution be removed. Now that would be a first. So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
gas. So it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front line. Within clear view of this front line position.
Have you ever wondered how much a human life is worth?
Have you ever looked up at the night sky and considered whether aliens are staring back? Or if it's even possible to measure intelligence?
If that sounds like you, it's time to join the Answers Project with me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge.
We've recruited the best brains in the world, award-winning astrophysicists, giants of medical science, and former presidential advisors to help us tackle humanity's biggest questions.
Find the answers wherever you get your podcasts.
This week on Razor, making the cosmic dust that made our solar system astronomy to safeguard endangered animals.
The survival of the human species depends on the environment. Without the oceans, without the forests, without a good functioning ecosystems, we might survive, but it's not going to be as it is now.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Local elections will be held across the UK on Thursday, a strong test of public opinion for Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his government.
In Northern Ireland, there's even more at stake, the devolved government itself. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Andrew Wilson, who's in Belfast for us. Andrew, Thursday's vote could bring a massive change in the political landscape there and far beyond.
Indeed. I mean, Jamie's really, people are starting to use words like seismic and historic, a wrecking ball going through the politics of Northern Ireland. If you think 24 years since the Good Friday Agreement was signed and put in place, the power-sharing arrangement here in Northern Ireland, and for all that 25 years, the First Minister has always been a unionist. In fact, a unionist from the Democratic Unionist Party. Loyal to the UK, loyal to the idea of staying part of the UK, dedicated against any idea of a united Ireland or any linking up with Dublin. That may be about to change. The unionists have been fighting amongst themselves, under pressure from Brexit, under pressure from the Northern Ireland Protocol, and under pressure from sectarian politics. Down for the DUP, the numbers have stayed steady for the Nationalist Party, the main one, Sinn Féin, still 6%. It's looking like they may now be the largest party in politics in Ireland, and that gives them...
I'm terribly sorry about that. We seem to have some interference on the line from Belfast, but the good news is we do have Andrew's report.
Unionist marchers drumming up support in a Belfast suburb. But the politics of power sharing is playing second fiddle to the cost of living crisis. These canvassers are facing pushback from their support base on the doorsteps.
I told a few friends of mine that the first DUP guy comes to the door, I'll walk him down to the front of the driveway there and tell him to go away. I don't want to talk to them.
The DUP, the top pro-UK unionist party, is in disarray over Brexit, the Northern Ireland Protocol and the energy crisis, and its top spot is under threat. Its rival, Sinn Féin, nationalist, anti-UK, pro-Ireland and pro-EU, has benefited greatly, running a low-key campaign avoiding the usual sectarian issues.
They don't want, an English expression, frighten the horses, and they're playing a safe campaign. And I suppose the old line from Napoleon comes to mind, you know, don't interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. So they're just playing it safe and seeing the unionist turmoil and competition sort itself out on the unionist side.
The largest party gets the top position in the Northern Ireland Assembly. Under the 24-year-old peace deal, Sinn Féin has always had the deputy role. Should Sinn Féin become the largest party, then that technically puts a nationalist in as First Minister here in Stormont. A politician whose core belief is separation from Westminster and unity with Ireland. A leader whose ideology ultimately requires that this institution be removed. Now that would be a first. Observers say the economic jolt from Brexit and disruption of trade routes within the UK has highlighted the appeal of Ireland, the EU neighbour to the south.
What's the better bet? You know, Ireland increasingly looks like a very successful, modern, prosperous European Union state, and the UK and the Boris Johnson government and the Brexiteers seem to be travelling in a rather problematic direction, so that's all to play for in the years ahead.
Nothing will happen overnight here, but younger parties unconnected with the old days of violence are on the rise. A message of compromise is getting harder to ignore. In troubled times, the established order is likely to take a knock this week, and with that, Northern Ireland's status within the UK can expect a seismic shift in direction.
Andrew, the B word doesn't go away, does it? Brexit still casts a long shadow across the island of Ireland and across the UK.
Well, it does, because the protocol, the Northern Ireland Protocol, was a decision made by negotiations between Westminster and Brussels. Northern Ireland wasn't really part of it, and yet, of course, it affects Northern Ireland intensely. And that part of the vote tomorrow will be all about whether you're pro or anti the protocol and what that stands for. Now, the Unionists were pro-Brexit. But when the protocol came along, they said this is not going to work. And the effect is easy to see now. Companies and food outlets here are now turning to the Irish and to local companies for their foodstuffs because it's so hard to get stuff over from the UK, and it's already steering the economy in a different direction. Now, that plays into the hands of people who approve of the protocol. They're saying, fine, let's do more business with Southern Ireland. Let's do more business with our neighbours in the EU. And that has a political message that works for Sinn Féin rather than for the Unionists. It's created an enormous hiccup for which there is no resolution. The Unionists are rejecting the protocol and saying they won't participate in government until it's solved. That's up to Westminster to sort out, which isn't doing anything about it at the moment, which leaves Sinn Féin to start bringing up that other B word, which is a border poll. Maybe it's time down the line we had a referendum on whether or not we should unite with Ireland and reject the UK. We're a long way from that at this stage, but should Sinn Féin end up with a First Minister in Stormont, it certainly breathes oxygen into the idea.
Andrew, thanks for that. Andrew Wilson, our correspondent in Belfast.
Russia has barred Japan's Prime Minister and several cabinet ministers from entering the country. Moscow has accused Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and 62 officials, many of them ministers, of launching an anti-Russian campaign with what it called unacceptable rhetoric over the war in Ukraine. Japan has implemented sanctions against Russia, including freezing the assets of President Putin.
The DPRK has fired a ballistic missile off its east coast. It's the country's 14th known weapons test this year. Last week, Pyongyang promised to develop its nuclear forces at maximum speed. South Korea and Japan have condemned the launch.
Beijing has closed scores of metro stations and bus routes in a bid to curb COVID infections. Authorities have also extended the closure of schools, restaurants, gyms and entertainment venues with no end date given. Over 40 cases were reported in the Chinese capital on Wednesday.
A Chinese expedition has reached the summit of the world's highest mountain. Scientists installed a weather station at the peak of Mount Chomolungma, known internationally as Everest.
It's expected to provide valuable data on climate change. CGTN correspondent Tao Yuan reports.
Hand waves from the top of the world. Jubilee